So very briefly, I'd like to provide a transatlantic perspective, focusing on first the similarities between the situation in the United States and France, and then also important differences between the two countries. So when I was thinking about this debate, and I'm very grateful for the invitation, and I learned a lot, so it's always very nice. I was thinking, okay, apple, oranges, yes and no. So I tried, to address this question. So I listed first some similarities, and most of the similarities I listed relate to the securitization of immigration issues on both sides of the Atlantic, and the subsequent new form of politicization of immigration issues in America and in France. By securitization of immigration issue, I know it sounds a little bit barbarian, but I mean the framing of immigration as a security issue, meaning that immigrants, broadly defined on both sides of the Atlantic, independently from their legal status, legal, illegal, or even newcomers, first generation, member of the second, third generation, all of them are perceived as a threat to national prosperity, national identity, and national safety. And this is what we call migrant phobia, and this is where I slightly disagree with Professor Moya. I think that in the United States, when we think about immigrants, I agree we think about Mexicans, but the second thing is illegal Hispanic, and if you're illegal, you're a criminal. So I think there is a strong correlation between immigration in the United States and criminality, knowing that, of course, there is plenty of evidence that immigration of Hispanics, but also other minorities, immigration does not increase criminality. But the problem is that reality does not matter when it comes to xenophobia and migrant phobia. So this, I think, on both sides, this migrant phobia is fueled by the overestimation of migration scale through the rhetoric of invasion. And Eric mentioned that, of course, if we compare the raw figures, we are amateur in France. We have very small migrant communities. But in fact, it doesn't matter. What really matters is the notion of symbolic threat. And there is no straightforward correlation between the size of migrant communities and the level of ethnic exclusivism. You can have, very high level of ethnic exclusivism in state, region, localities where you have only small migrant communities. So this is the overestimation of migration scale. We have data about that. On average, both American and French tend to overestimate the number of foreigners, once again broadly defined, by 25%. There is also, I think, a common assumption that newcomers are too foreign, too different to assimilate. And there is, in conjunction with this inerrancy about immigration flows, an underestimation of migrant and minority integration. Because despite discrimination, and here I'm not dismissing discrimination in France, in education, in the labor market, and so on, but despite everything, migrants are more integrated than expected. And this is, I think, quite similar in the US, where Hispanics, they're perfectly fluent in English. especially the second, not to mention the third generation. So, sorry for Huntington, but they're perfectly assimilated. So this is what I call the securitization of immigration issues, and this trend predated 9/11, but of course 9/11 boosted, this framing of immigration as a security issue on both sides of the Atlantic. And the main vectors are public discourse, media coverage, spreading negative perception of immigrants, negative stereotypes, shared by a significant portion of both American and French public opinion, that immigrants are a burden for the economy, that they don't have the same values, they pose a threat to national identity and therefore to national safety and, in the end, to national security. And also, I think there are strong convergences between public policies, those implemented after 9/11, and this is why I call the blurring of the distinction between immigration policies and counter-terrorist policies. Immigration policies used as a way to prevent terrorism and also to control minority groups, and counter-terrorist policies supposed to manage migration flows. In both cases, it didn't work, it's not working, it's not going to work, and it's counterproductive. And also, by securitization, I think it's worth noting that racial profiling, discrimination against many different minorities on both sides of the Atlantic are all justified by the necessity to protect the nation. So infringement of civil liberties, violation of human rights, everything based on the distinction between, as we would say, us and them. In this securitized context, the second similarity I listed is the new forms of politicization of immigration issues, which affect immigration policies, immigration politics, and also integration policy, because it's time to say, hey, immigrants aged, and at some point they also became citizens of the country where they live. So we're dealing with newcomers, with foreigners, but we're also dealing with an increasing number of people who are born in the US and therefore American citizen, or the member of the second and third generation in France. So this politicization of migration issues, the main vector are nativism and Islamophobia. And I was quite surprised, but maybe it's because of the French perspective, by the multiplication, not at the federal level, but at the state level in this country, the multiplication of French-style controversies, very French-style controversies, issues such as bilingualism, the anchor babies controversy, which is very French. I mean, you don't have the right to become automatically citizen just because you're born in the country. This is very French. Okay? The opposition to Ground Zero Mosque, which was not the mosque, by the way, but anyway, but also in other cities, in Wisconsin, Georgia, and Kentucky. The ultimate example for me was when Herman Cain, okay, you know the guy, 999, said, oh, if I'm elected, there was no Muslim at the White House. I think it was, the cherry on the top of the poison cake. And I was very surprised by the lack of reaction. I thought it was the end of his political career. Actually, it took a few women to kill the guy, if I may say. But I was quite surprised because, I was expecting, something, but no. So, although the forces that drive the politics of immigration remain different in the United States and France, I think there are strong signs of convergence in terms of policy proposals articulated largely for electoral purposes. Not to mention that our presidents on both sides of the Atlantic face similar challenges: economic distress, political distrust, and integration issues. The most radical integration issue being the emergence of on-ground terrorists. However, having said that, very briefly I want to list differences. And here I'm more optimistic maybe than Professor Moya. I think that, yeah, the American system remains more open than the French one. And this American openness can be explained by three factors that are either weak or insignificant in France. The first one is the institutional framework, the veto point system. For better or worse, in this country, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to reform the immigration system. So the good news is that restrictionist attempt to strengthen border control and everything failed, but also all the attempt to have a more comprehensive immigration reform. So it's, you know, it works both ways. Second, the second reason, second factor, pro-migrant interest groups and migrant lobbies will have an impact on agenda formation. Open immigration policy is overtly supported in this country by various economic interest groups. And you were right, we're still waiting for an educated debate in France about the benefits of immigration. At some point, someone has to pay for a pension. And finally, the size of the migrant community. So size matter, especially at the congressional district level. There are strong incentive for political leaders, policymakers in this country to attract the vote of ethnic minorities. In France, there is absolutely no incentive. They can, you know, just dismiss the claims from any form of minority groups and so on. And there is no significant groups advocating the expansion of immigration, no incentive to quote ethnic voters. Therefore, there is no ethnic politics. There was the debate about the Muslim vote a few days ago, following the call of mosques to vote against Sarkozy, but there is no Muslim vote, even against Sarkozy. And as a result, ethnic minority populations are not politically visible, and we can be quite, rather pessimistic about, opportunities for them to fight for their rights.